so you have a great idea of what it's going to look like long before you actually do finish the hotel on the field. Yes?
Hi, Mike. Obviously, Epcot today isn't the same as what I had envisioned when he envisioned. Do you feel that it lived up to his vision of Epcot?
Well,
in its current state?
You know, Walt wanted to build a community that that you could experiment with things with. And a lot of it came out of his visits. Bob was with him on a number of these visits to the great laboratories of DuPont and IBM and Westinghouse and GE. And they'd all trot out the newest thing they were working on. And quite often Walt would say, well, when can I buy something with this technology? And they'd say, well, we don't know if the public is interested in it. Well, at the New York World's Fair, Walt became so popular in the things that he did. I think he could have been elected chairman of GE. You know, they just loved him because they changed the whole attitude toward that company as a result of what we did at the World's Fair. And so Walt really wanted to do a demonstration in the city, demonstrating new products, new technologies. But it really took a Walt Disney, a single person. Walt could have made it happen. I am convinced of that. But nobody else in the world could have. Nobody. And nobody at Disney could do it at that time. Bob, you were with Walt on a number of those trips to the labs.
Oh yes, in January of 1966, we had a little company plane. It would carry 13, 14 people, and he would take us on a Sunday with his drawings. We'd sit in the airplane, and this airplane never got above 21,000 feet. It was certainly not a jet. And we would bang along at these low altitudes with him pointing out in the drawings what's going to go where, and we worked all day, and then we'd stop, go to a hotel, and then we'd go to some of the companies that Marty would mention. And he would walk in, and there'd be all the executives and the engineers, and they were just totally fascinated with this idea. And it was fascinating to watch Walt drag us around doing these little sales junkets to these named companies and see their eyes light up, particularly the people who were developing R&D. They could see at last, oh, there's going to be a shot that we can get our idea out there in public, but in a protected place, because this would be like a controlled type of place where it would be like a sabbatical where people from these companies would come and live and demonstrate their products. And then all of our guests would get a chance to experience them. Good part was, well, if they didn't work well, they didn't sell them, we just sort of take them out and put something else in there eventually.
So, you know, some of these R&D places, I remember when we were working with Ford on the World's Fair, John Hinch and I went into what was called advanced styling. And there were these two guys that were working on what they said was reversible seat cushions for cars. And so John was Mr. How can we describe John? He was the taste panel. He was the taste panel. And John said, well, do you have any, to these designers, he said, do you have any idea that the public is interested in reversible seat cushions? And they said, no. And he said, well, why are you doing it? And they said, well, we like it. And then he said, has anybody ever tried this before? And they said, oh yeah, it was on the last Packard ever made. So not all these R&D locations were exactly way out in the future. You know?
Now, the head of all medicine and research at Epcot said that if something came up, they would know to go there and find out how to get a rare disease, take it down instead of...
Well, he had a lot of people working on a project that we didn't even know about. And there were a lot of things that I think he was exploring because he wanted to, as I said, he wanted to be a demonstration. And it's like one time he wanted to build an all-year resort because he wanted to set an example. All these things were setting an example to better our lives. much more than entertainment. One more question.
Of course, the majority of you had the privilege of working with Walt Disney and knowing him personally. What would you say is the greatest lesson that you learned from him that helped you be successful in your career as an Imagineer?
Wow.
Oh, that's really simple. There's a big, giant difference between having an executive that issues orders that rolls downstream through layers of the managers. Walt never did that. Walt simply worked directly with the people that he was working with, and it was really common in those days. You never knew where Walt was, but you knew be ready for him to show up in your room at any time with no warning, just to come in to see what you're doing and make sure it's moving in the direction, and if it wasn't moving quite in the direction, he'd have some suggestions that were never along the line of other executives would say, no, that's not what I want. Walt would say, well, what do you think if we did it this way, if we did it that way? And that would invite you to make other suggestions. And he did that to everybody in the whole company.
Well, let's end on that, but let's let everybody comment on it. Don.
Yeah, my comment would be that my dad came from the same school as Walt in this way. And even the boss that I work for, Roger Brody, is that quality is what counts. And there's no substitute for quality. If you can't do it right the first time, then you shouldn't be doing it. But my boss was a taskmaster, so was my dad. If he did something wrong or did something sloppily, there's no room for that. And Walt was the champion of quality.
I'm going to be last. You're next.
I was going to say that Walt, I asked him when I first started on doing the costumes. I was from manufacturing, and when he asked me to do the costumes and that, I said to him, how much am I allowed for to spend on each costume? And he looked at me kind of like he didn't care for what I said, and the eyebrow went up, and he said, Alice, he said, I just want you to make the best costume with the best material and quality that you possibly can for girls that from the age of 1 to 100 will want to have and will have it, just stay with them. And he said, he said, do the very best you can with the best materials. And he said, I've got a building over there full of bookkeepers that can pay for the quality and that. And he said, always give people more than they think they deserve or will receive. And he said, if you do that, they'll always come back. He said, if you cheat them, you'll never see them again. And quality
I think it's teamwork that I really learned from him. I really, because of my experiences, I related to the coach. He'd call the play, and everyone would go to the line, and we all knew what we had to do. You knew you had help in order to get it done. You couldn't get it done by yourself. And it took all of us in order to accomplish the goals that he laid out in front of us. And I think that was the best thing that I think he did.
Yeah, it's what John Hens used to say. He'd say, it's not an I business, it's a we business. There's so many hands to it. Kim?
Well, I never knew Walt. I came long after he had passed, but I was lucky enough to have John Henches was one of my mentors. And John would come down to Disneyland when I relocated down here in 1980. Once a month, every month, without doubt, he would be there. And we would walk the park for at least 2.5 hours, and then we'd ride Space Mountain. That was but he would share every story he could think of every time when we walked through the park, why things were a certain way. And they were things that you really wouldn't recognize or notice unless somebody pointed them out to you. And he'd often say, it wasn't a lucky accident that this all worked so well. And I think about those stories every day when I walk through the park, and definitely try to share them with the new people that work with me now, because they're so important.
Well, I had two things that stick in my mind. One was he was not interested in anything any of us did yesterday. He was only interested in what we were going to do tomorrow. And what a way to work when somebody tells you, whatever you did yesterday is never going to be good enough again, because I'm not going to be there. I'm going to the next day. And the other thing was, and this came from Buzz Price, who of course did the site study for Disneyland and Walt Disney World. And Buzz had to figure out when something really wasn't quite right, he'd have to figure out a way to tell Walt that it wasn't quite right. And he came up with the idea that you could say, yes, if, to Walt Disney. Yes, if you tried this little bit nuance in what you're talking about. But you never said no because. And we all learned, if you said no to Walt Disney, that was the last time you probably had a chance to say anything to him. Because he was going to find somebody who was willing to take a chance and take the risk. And what Buzz said, and I believe this very strongly, that the no because is the language of somebody who doesn't want to make the deal. But yes if is the language creative people love, because it says, I want this to happen. So that was Walt Disney. You'd say yes if, but never, never, never no. Anyway, thank you all.